Welcome, everyone. I'm Penny Lewis, the Executive Director of the Ecological Landscape Alliance, and I'll be the moderator for today's webinar, Supporting Local Ecology, Native Plants for Small Home Gardens. This is part of the Focus on Sustainability webinar series. This series was developed by a group of organizations known regionally for their quality ecological education, and by collaborating on these webinars, we're able to reach a larger audience than our individual regional programs. In case you're not familiar with our organizations, they are largely nonprofit and volunteer groups in the United States. The regional groups are the Ecological Landscape Alliance, the Chesapeake Conservation Landscaping Council, the Illinois Landscape Contractors Association Sustainability Committee, the Kansas City Native Plant Initiative, and Rescape California. And now I'd like to introduce our presenter, Kate Brandis. Kate is the manager of the Landscaping for Communities and Wildlife program at Lehigh Gap Nature Center in Slatington, Pennsylvania. Kate has worked as a geologist and an environmental scientist for more than 20 years. She also has been a master gardener through the Penn State Extension Program for more than 15 years. And she's a member of the Ecological Landscape Alliance. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Penny. And good afternoon, everyone. Let's see, my slide is not advancing for some reason. Here we go. Okay, so welcome again, and I will be talking about mostly about a number of resources that the Lehigh Gap Nature Center has developed for residents on how to use native plants for the small home garden. And just to give you a tiny little bit about where I work, which is the Lehigh Gap Nature Center, and again located in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania. That's a 2-county area in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. It is a nature center that is, I think, the only one in the country that is based on a Superfund site. This was a very large area, 750 acres. That is a Superfund site because of zinc contamination, and the Nature Center is known for its large-scale restoration of that land using native grasses. And so they've won some national awards because of that restoration effort. And I'm sharing this with you because it leads to them getting funded for the program that I'm going to talk about, which is the Landscaping for Communities and Wildlife program that I have been managing for 5 years, and that is sort of the basis from which I'm going to talk about the resources that we developed for residents so that they are encouraged to use native plants in their home landscape. And we have we received funding. The Lehigh Gap Nature Center received funding 5 years ago, and so the funding was for a 5-year program. So we knew at the beginning of that period 5 years ago that we had 5 years to implement a program, and our objective was to the objective from the grant money that we received was really the only guiding principle was that we would use native plants in the Lehigh Valley area, that 2-county area. And so since we knew we had funding for 5 years, we really wanted to kind of think through our objectives in the very beginning and try to think about, well, what are the needs, not only in our local area, but what are really some resources that we could develop that would be useful, you know, to a much broader population and a broader public. And in order to think that through carefully, we formed a steering committee of people drawing on expertise from local colleges and universities, as well as conservation groups in our area who'd all worked with native plant initiatives in one form or another. And we decided that, you know, what we really wanted to do was have a residential focus. So we wanted to at the end of the day, develop resources that would be useful for the resident. And that we also saw the need to develop resources for the small yard. We'd all seen, you know, native plant resources for families or people with a larger property, including like designs and that sort of thing and guides. but we really hadn't seen resources if you just have a quarter of an acre. So that became our focus early on. And we were guided also by some social science, and certainly by the science work of people like Doug Tallamy, you know, the science behind using native plants to kind of connect and benefit the local ecology. So those, and I'm going to walk through mostly the social science, but certainly we drew on the science of that ecological science as well. So I'm going to walk you through that a little bit. And sharing this all with you so that I can, you know, just because I think it will serve as a framework for the resources that I will show you that we did develop for residents. And we had our objective, or kind of our strategic plan for the 5-year program was that we did a number of, in fact, almost 40 public projects as examples for the Lehigh Valley community in the first 3 years of our program. And then we used those kind of case studies, if you will, to develop resources for the residents. And I'll sort of go through this step by step with you, but I just wanted to give you that overview. So, as I said, our steering committee in the very beginning kind of realized that most people seem to have experience with native plant gardens. And by most people, I'm talking about like the broad cross-section of people. So we were really wanting to reach outside of those people who were already interested in native plants. We kind of were thinking like broadly, how can we reach people at the neighborhood level and get them excited about using native plants in their garden spaces? And we realized that people had sort of two experiences. One was sort of this top photograph where, you know, there are often these beautiful meadows that people put in using native plants, but you know, if you have a small home, this is maybe not something that you would embrace. Not everybody would. And then the bottom photograph, you know, certainly at botanical gardens, we have many here in Pennsylvania, especially in the southeastern part of Pennsylvania. Native plants are used in gardens, but, you know, it takes a big team of people in order to maintain those landscapes. So we felt like, how can we develop a picture for people or examples for people that feel more attainable or more for them, that it feels like, you know, I could do that in my own yard. And so we looked a little bit at the social science research behind how people view their landscapes. There is quite a bit out there, and you know, researchers, social science researchers, there's a lot to say here, but, you know, mostly sort of at the bottom line is that people want to, generally, again, the broad cross section of people view their yard as a place where they want to fit in. They want their yard to be normal. They want it to look like it fits within their neighborhood. That, you know, the general person does not want to feel judged. And so their yard, they want it to fit in, you know, basically. And so that told us, you know, again, the steering committee, that what we needed to do was provide examples for people so that they could see native plants in a way that might look nice in their own yard. So that, you know, might look nice in their own yard, and also sort of, if we could put enough examples within our little 2-county area, people would also begin to see these plants and these landscapes as something that was more normal. So we had this you know, we had two objectives there. We wanted it to sort of normalize the landscape, but we also wanted to provide examples that looked like, you know, something people would want to have in their yard. So that was our idea there with, you know, thinking through those 40 gardens that we wanted to install in public places in the first 3 years of our 5-year program. So, you know, we looked a lot at what do people consider ideal? And there is some research about how people have a certain standard for the front yard versus the backyard. Backyards, people are willing to experiment maybe a little more. In the front yard, you know, general consensus among people is that the idea of feeling more normal and wanting to look normal is much more focused on the front yard. So, you know, what did people want? They want clean, generally neat rows, trimmed hedges, lack of weeds. And so, you know, what we wanted to think through was, well, if this is what most people want, how can we show native plantings that sort of fit into this model? And so we made some assumptions at the outset of our program, you know, in the beginning of the 5 years. And that was that at least, you know, that many people have small properties, maybe not most, but many people do. We are in the Lehigh Valley, we have an urban core, a 3-city area, Allentown, Bethlehem, and Easton, small cities. And then we also have beyond that sort of a belt of suburbia, and then beyond that, a belt of rural property owners. But the majority of our population have smaller properties, and you know, going back to that social science piece, we knew that most of the population wants a more manicured look, and that most native gardens examples that are out there for people are either sort of impractical, or they really don't often offer that look, the manicured look that people are sort of thinking about when they're thinking about their yards. We also knew that cost matters to people, and that maintenance is hard. Like we wanted to think through those things as well, as we were thinking about our program. So our approach was that we wanted to begin, as I said, in the first 3 years by installing some small, nicely designed and well thought out native plant gardens throughout the Lehigh Valley, our 2-county area, in public places where people could see them. And we also installed a sign with each of those gardens so that people could read about the different plants, and to understand, you know, what our intention was. And this acted, as I said, in 2 ways, sort of to normalize the look of the natives, but also to have people hopefully look at these gardens and say, that's attractive. I would want some of these plants in my own yard. And by doing that, you know, we wanted to try to address some of the design and aesthetic concerns that some people have about native plants, and provide a, you know, we knew early on that when we were doing these 40 gardens, that it also gave us this great opportunity to stay with these gardens for a number of years. We had 5 years. And so once we installed the gardens, we knew we could go back and look at these places and see how they did over time. We were not caring for the gardens. We had with all of our 40 projects, we had an agreement with the property owner that they would maintain the garden for a period of 5 years. But we helped support them and did visit each of these gardens 3 times a year so that we could kind of learn from them, learn from the planting, see what worked and what didn't work. We also, over the 5 years, we did a lot of public programming. So we did the 40 gardens as examples, but we also did a lot of workshops, a lot of partnerships with others. And our approach during our workshops and any time that we, and you know, to make it clear that we encourage the use of natives, but you know, ornamentals aren't necessarily bad in our opinion. But we did make the distinction between, you know, invasive plants versus non-native and ornamentals that people might want to include in their garden spaces. And along with those workshops, we always, you know, our focus was always about ecosystem benefits. We're an environmental organization, and that was our main objective for the 5-year program. So just in terms of outreach activities that we did over the 5 years, public talks, workshops, different conferences. We started a bi-monthly newsletter that people could receive about not only the native plant programming that we were doing, but others as well. We partnered with other native plant organizations within the Lehigh Valley and supported their initiatives that were outside of our independent one. We tried to support other organizations, native plant sellers in our area, that sort of thing. We formed partnerships with all of the libraries in the Lehigh Valley and provided them with books on native plants and native plant landscaping. And those books were, we offered books that were suitable for children to adults. And we did that just to make sure that we had as much public access to information in as many places as we could. We also had a partnership here with our local Penn State Extension Master Gardeners, who helped us in many ways to spread the word about native plants and programming. And I'm going to share with you the resources that we developed, and they also helped us share those resources as well. So our main message during our 5 years, if I had to boil it down, was that yards can be healthy, beautiful places that for us, but also that support our local ecosystems. So I'm just going to share with you, I mentioned that we did 40 different projects. I'm just going to share just a smattering of the ones that we did. This was at a library in the city of Allentown, the upper left-hand corner, which is 2015. That was the way the garden space originally looked, and we removed those non-native shrubs and replaced them with some native plants that you can see there in the pictures. We did these public projects at all kinds of different places. This one was at a Presbyterian Church, a very sort of a central church in the city of Allentown. And the before and after picture there you can see. This is one at a Catholic school in the city of Bethlehem. Their environmental science teacher wanted to be able to take the students out and show them pollinators and that sort of thing. And so we put in this garden. You can see that the gardens, the look of them, I'll just go back quickly, is very different depending on where we were. And so we worked very closely with our garden partners to see what was going to suit them, and what look did they really want, and what was, what could they envision really lasting at their properties for the 5 years. You can see the sign in this picture. That was a sign that we installed at pretty much every public project that we did. We did one here at a homeless shelter. This was in conjunction with, they put in a food garden. They have no grass, and so everything was in containers, including the native plants, which you can see on the upper right there. Those containers have lasted multiple seasons now with those same plants. We are located in the Lehigh Valley as the Martin Guitar Museum and Factory, and they were interested in having native plant landscaping. This is a very large campus with very traditional landscaping. You can see there in the 2014 picture. And this was one of the first projects we did, so this project has lasted a long time. And they have a little one section of their traditionally landscaped campus is now full of native plants, and so it makes this kind of interesting contrast. Many people come to see this Martin Guitar Factory from all over the country. So it's a really great place to have had a public project. So as I said, we visited each of these projects post-installation 3 times a year and photographed all of the gardens 3 times a year, and also recorded the success rate for the plants and used that data as information that we could draw on to put together resources for residents. What our goal was to be able to develop design templates for residents to use in their own gardens. And we also, during our project, did several surveys with the general public about native plants, and we really wanted to understand what the barriers were, how people felt about them, did people know about them, and that sort of thing. We also did interviews with all 40 of our garden partners, usually post-installation several years later, so that we could really understand as much as possible the public's view of those spaces and the feedback and from the community about those spaces, which was also very helpful. So when we were thinking about what kind of resources we wanted to put together for residents, we really tried to stick to the basics. So we created a series of design templates that I'm going to show you in just a moment. And what we tried to do with that is we thought, okay, well, what are sort of, if you have a small yard and you're, you live in a neighborhood, what are the kind of, small gardens, ideas that come to mind? And I'll show you those, but, examples would be like if you just have a corner, or if you have a mailbox and you put a little mailbox garden in. But when we were doing those design templates, we really tried to think through what people often maybe struggle with if they don't know the plants very well, or if they just haven't thought through garden design much before. And so, we thought through, well, how much sunlight does this area have? What's the plant height, the bloom time? We thought through the designs in terms of, can we offer something blooming all times of year? Designs that were specific to sunlight and moisture. We thought through textures and that sort of thing. We also wanted to keep our designs simple, to mimic nature as much as possible, to use some repetition, to sort of mass or group plants together. So simple things that make for kind of a united space and a united design feeling. So over the last year, we are in the 5th year of our 5-year program. And so this was the year that we wanted to put together, these resources for residents that drew on all of our experience with those gardens, with workshops, with everything that we've done and everything that we've learned in trying to talk to everyday residents about native plants. And so we put together a little book. This is the cover of it. And it has various information in it, but I'm just going to show you, mostly I'm going to show you just the design templates that we put together. So this is just a sample. I just want to go through the sample so you kind of understand what we're going to be looking at. I'll show you all of the templates that we have, but for each one, we have a location. We tried to think of, well, what are the typical gardens a resident might have? So in this case, it's a little small pond garden. But we designed each one for certain conditions, and then also offered other plant options for other site conditions. So this one you can see there at the top right is for a wetter and more shade area, but we have options for like wetter and sunnier conditions in this case. And then the gardens were designed on a grid that can be expanded or contracted. We drew each plant to size, and with a little dot in the middle, so that like that's one clethra bush, for instance. But you could put in more if you wanted to expand. So these are just meant to give people ideas about kind of placement of plants and size-wise, and but meant to be modified for however anybody wanted to do it. In this book that we put together, we also have a very detailed list of other plants in a table in the back that are divided up into the site conditions you would have in your yard. So they're divided into like wetter and more shade, or wetter and more sun, or drier and more shade, or drier and more sun. Those were the 4 conditions. So people would be encouraged to draw from that table and incorporate other plants if they wanted to into this kind of basic design template. We wrote the names of the plants and tried to give some pictures of the different kinds of plants so people could kind of visualize. So let me move on to, so I'm just going to go through the design templates and what we offered. So we worked with a graphic designer. We know that people have a hard time visualizing what it might look like, so we wanted to give, for each of the garden designs, we wanted to give a beautiful drawing of what the garden might look like in full bloom. And here's the design for that same garden. This is a corner garden, and you can see the design there. This is for, we redrew this one for drier and more sun conditions. But then the following pages offer other plants for other conditions. So you can see the plant alternatives here. On the left, drier and more shade. In the middle, a plant selection for wetter and more shade. And on the right, wetter and more sun. All of the plants that are contained in these designs, and also that are included in the table in the back, if people wanted to pull in other plants, they were selected based on our experience with those 40 gardens. So, and by that I mean that, we, after a lot of experimenting, we could figure out, well, which plants are really going to work in a small space, which are going to behave, which are really going to spread like crazy, and maybe we don't want to include that for a small yard. We could make those choices and kind of weed out some of the things that would be maybe less ideal for people, and keep those out of our book. So most of these plants, we found do, for the most part, behave. Some things we would suggest for, like, we might suggest if it is something that might spread a little bit more, it would be, but behaves in a shade condition and maybe gets really out of control in a sun condition, we would include that use of that in a shady area. So we did make choices like that as well. We gave examples for container gardens, and for people who have no yard. We had that one example that I showed of the public garden we did at the homeless shelter. So some people have no, maybe they only have a balcony. We wanted to give them an option. So here's the drawing. Here's the design with some different options for plant choices. We did a small water feature garden. Again, here's sort of the drawing. This is what it might look like. And you saw this design before, but this is, again, with some different choices for whether you have shade or more sun. A sidewalk strip garden, this was thinking about the urban gardener, and sometimes, maybe they will only got that green space between their sidewalk and the road. Very limited, harsh, limited plant selection for that area, but we wanted to give people an option for that. So here's, a design and a few plants that might work in that space. A downspout garden, for people to be able to use that water in a different way. This is a design we did for there with some, again, the different plants and choices and drawings. We did a rock wall garden with, again, those plant alternatives. A front porch garden. Again, we tried to think about the common garden spaces for the small yard. And here is the design. And this is wetter and more shade. And then we have all of the different options, depending on the conditions, different conditions. Mailbox garden I mentioned. And here is the design and the different conditions and plants associated with those. A back patio garden, a little bit more elaborate, and the different choices. And so those are the designs that we offered in the book and that we offer in the book. The book is just done. and I wanted to give you just a quick view of the first page of the plant table that we have in the book. And again, this table goes on for several pages, but it's divided up into site conditions. And the reasoning behind this table, or why we included it in there, is it's a list of plants, again, that's most suitable for the small yard, that people can draw from. So if they didn't, maybe they don't like any of the plant choices for the templates that I just showed you, they could come here and figure out, they could pick other plants that they might either like more or maybe have better access to. So we really wanted those templates to be as versatile as possible and give people enough information to change it up if they wanted to. And so we included this table that, again, in the book goes on for many pages. We also found through our discussions with people and the general public that, it was very hard sometimes for people to, if they're not familiar with plants that much, or, with weeds, people had a hard time distinguishing between weeds and plants sometimes. And so we included a number of common yard weeds, included a number of drawings of common yard weeds. And this is also in the book. The book is, hopefully a very practical guide for residents, but this is in the book and includes more than just this. This is just an example page, but is a way for people to hopefully be able to identify the yard weeds more easily. We also wanted to include in the book, and did include, drawings of common invasive plants that people often have in their yards, and just to raise awareness of these plants and encourage people to, over time, as it makes sense, perhaps replace them with a native option. And again, this is just one example of several pages of these drawings we have of invasive plants in the home garden. In the book also is, there's lots more information, but that, we identified as useful for people over the 5 years of our project. So we have, like tables like this, where we have the commonly sold invasives and maybe a native plant alternative, and, try to list some of the features of that native plant and why it is a good replacement for something that people might be putting in their yard that's invasive. So I'm about to conclude here pretty soon, but I did want to just go over a couple of the lessons that we learned over the 5 years. And these, some of these draw on our experiences from those public gardens, and I would say, most of these would, and also experience with those public gardens and experience with talking to people and what really resonates with people in terms of encouraging them to use natives in their home garden. So one of the things we found with our experience with partnering over those first 3 years with different organizations is that often, if our partner had even just a little gardening experience, those gardens were more successful. Of the 40 gardens, I'm very happy to say that 38 of them are still going strong, and they're doing really well. I credit the partners for their hard work, but I think since we visited those gardens post installation 3 times a year, and those garden partners were able to ask us and draw on us as a resource, that really helped, I think, with the sustainability of those gardens. We found also that the more invested our project partners were with those public gardens, the better. So the more input they had in terms of design, in terms of plant selection, the better those projects went, and the better cared for they were. Maintenance, this won't be a surprise to probably anyone listening, but for all of those gardens, maintenance was definitely the hardest part. It's the biggest challenge. Often, I found that if I knew that that our partner was not going to have a lot of time, or there wasn't a lot of experience on their part with plants, I would often recommend shrubs rather than perennials, because they're just so much easier to care for in the long run. And I found that that was very effective. So I just wanted to mention that. And I found that by the end, I was encouraging lots of people to start small and to dream big. And I think that's good advice, because I think it can be, using native plants when you're not familiar with them can be overwhelming at first. So it's good to start small and learn those plants little by little and expand as needed or as desired. The signs that we installed with our public projects were very important. I found we needed those in order to kind of communicate what we needed to communicate. And certainly with all of our public programming, people really valued hearing the ecological science behind why native plants are important, and they certainly do care about butterflies and birds, and we're very interested to hear those connections. And then just a few things about that we learned about how people feel about their yards, and this goes back to a little bit of the social science, but also, you know, just experience over those 5 years talking with many people about native plants, is that design and beauty are important in native plant garden design and success, I would say. And that connection to wildlife is important. The birds and butterflies, people do want that. Cost does matter. You know, native plants can be expensive. We organized a perennial exchange Facebook website for the Lehigh Valley, and that has been helpful. People can trade plants, people who don't even know each other, but there are also a lot of other perennial exchange kind of opportunities in the Lehigh Valley, and I think that's a wonderful way to start. We always, in the book, we talk about, you know, sharing with neighbors and that sort of thing, to maintenance. Again, that peer pressure thing, the idea that people want to, you know, fit in with their neighborhoods is very real, and we saw that over and over again. And also that change is possible over time. The more people who do it, the more normal it becomes. And that is, again, something we learned, you know, from social science early on, but that proved to be true throughout our program. So that is all I have, and I hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We have several questions, many of them about the book, the booklet name, author, and availability. Here
it is, all of that info. So here's my name and my website, my email address. And then the book is available for download at that first link, the second link. And then the garden plans, if you just wanted to download those, they're available for free download. Garden plans only, and that's the very last link there.
Excellent. So just to clarify, you said both of these are available for free download?
Free download, yeah. Yeah, we do have printed copies of the book, but they are limited. They're very expensive to print. But if anyone really needs one, you can email me and I will get one to you as long as the supply lasts.
All right, excellent. Some of the other questions are about the project itself. Can you talk a little bit more about the funding for the project, in terms of what the overall budget was, where the funding came from, those sorts of things?
Sure, yep. So we had the funding for the program came from a local community foundation, the Lehigh Valley Community Foundation. And so they committed to that 5 years of funding. We had $20,000 a year. And that paid for, all of that money pretty much went into plants, I'd say, almost all of it. And then I was hired to manage the program. My time and effort was covered by another grant from a private funder.
All right. And so you said the full budget was $20,000 a year? Or that
Yes,
was
it was
exclusive?
$100,000 altogether, but it was $20,000 a year, $20,000 for each one of 5 years, and then combined 100,000.
Excellent. Very good. So there are many, many questions that we're going to try to get to. If we're not able to get to your question, please contact Kate directly. The next question is about information on your website. So this is moravian.edu is the website.
Well, that's my current email address. The Lehigh Gap Nature Center is what people could Google if they wanted to learn more about the program itself.
Okay, excellent. And can you talk a little bit about the location of the project in terms of the hardiness zone, and also talk about what was your definition of native plants for that specific location?
Mm-hmm. So location-wise, we are in the eastern part of Pennsylvania. So we're about an hour north of Philadelphia. So that's, our I don't know how to say it more clearly than that, but we are, most Northeast native plants do find here in our part of Pennsylvania. And what did we define? How do we define native? We didn't use Western plants, for instance, but we didn't confine ourselves to, a certain area, I guess, except that we were using things that were native to the East. I'd say that's probably the clearest thing I could say.
Okay. One of the questions is about butterfly bush. Mm-hmm. This particular listener indicates that it's not invasive in her area, and she's wondering about it being listed as an invasive.
Mm-hmm. It is invasive in our area, so we did have it there. It's a very problematic in certain parts of of the Lehigh Valley, so we included it.
And I know from anecdotal evidence from a few people that I've spoken with that there are places in New Hampshire and Massachusetts where mm-hmm. the seedlings are becoming problematic. Yeah.
My experience is that particularly in waste areas, it can really be crazy. So, yeah.
Yes. I'm not allowed. The question is about your templates. Do any of them include edibles like herbs or fruits or nut trees?
No.
Okay. And was that just because they weren't considered sufficiently ornamental, or just a time constraint?
Well, I guess I consider blueberries native, and so we were focused on natives. I'm not sure, we have serviceberry there. You can, those are edible berries. I don't know that our design templates had any serviceberry, but in the book we do mention that if you were looking for a smaller tree for the home, serviceberry is a good one. And beyond that, I guess I'm not familiar with a lot of more natives that would be edible.
All right. Can you share the information about where you sourced your signage?
Sure. We designed the signs, and then we had them printed at a printer located in Maryland. That if somebody wanted to email me about the specifics of that, I'm happy to answer that email.
Okay. This question is about curiosity about what happened to the two gardens that did not continue on.
Oh, well, in one case, it was a school garden that, unbeknownst to us, closed down for a year for renovation, and so the garden was abandoned for a whole year, and that just did not work out. And in another case, we had another small garden at a school where our garden partner left to go elsewhere for another job, and so the garden was not then owned by anyone. So that's what happened in those two cases.
All right. How did you work with garden centers and nurseries to make sure that the plants being recommended were available?
We have a really good native plant grower here who they only sell natives, and we worked almost strictly with them. And so I would work with them. I would try to get a sense of all of the projects that we were doing in the early spring. So all of the projects that we were doing in the spring and then in the fall, we would do 2 planting seasons, one spring, one fall. I would try to get an idea of all of the partners early in the spring, talk to the nursery, and line up the plants. And that would kind of determine whether they were going to be installed in the spring or fall, depending on plant access. Of course, other projects came up, kind of, would pop up and we would adjust, but that was kind of our how we did it, how we planned.
Okay. Did any of your plant lists take into account deer browse?
Mm-hmm. We have in the book, on that table that I referred to, we have notes about plants that are deer tolerant. It's been my experience that no plant is completely immune to deer if they're hungry enough, but we did try to share information about plants that at least were, either tolerant of some browse or that deer would avoid, usually because of scent or that sort of thing.
All right. Can you supply the list of books that were provided to local libraries?
Sure. If somebody can email me, I'm happy to share that list. Sure.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
And also, on your website, is there access for use of the PowerPoint slides that you've used in this presentation?
This is not on there, but I think it will be on your website. Yes.
There will be online access to the recording.
Okay.
We would not provide the PowerPoint presentation itself. So anyone who registered for the website, we will be sending you a link within the next couple of weeks of the recording. And for ELA members and all of our regional partners, there will be a link on the members only pages for them to access the recording. The next question is, I'm surprised to see annual fleabane on the list of weeds. It's native in most of the U.S. and outcompetes weeds. So the question is, how was this determined to be on your weed list?
Yeah, I get that question a lot. I put it on the weed list because most residential homeowners would consider it a weed and not something they want in their yard. So that is why it's on there, because the book is for, for the broad cross section of America and what their desires are for their yard. And we're hoping, we wanted to encourage people to use natives, but fleabane is not something most people want in their yard. So they would consider it a weed, and we put it on the weed list for that reason.
Sure. What was the project's approach on educating the public about eliminating synthetic fertilizers?
That was part of all of so we did, over the 5 years, we did many, many, many workshops. And that was always part of our message that, we focused on the health of the yard space for the family, for pets, and certainly the using natives to limit the need for pesticides and herbicides and fertilizers was part of our conversation.
All right. What were the 3 other design considerations that you mentioned?
3 other design considerations that I mentioned. Let me
Keep
see.
it simple and then
Use repetition and, with color, but, maybe with plants as well. And then mass plants or group plants together. Mostly kind of all of those are trying to look at nature and mimic nature as much as possible.
all right. You mentioned that the print copies are very expensive. Do you actually sell the limited copies that you have available, and if so, how much are they?
I just picked up the print copies yesterday, and so I have not had that conversation yet about whether they might be for sale. My guess is that they won't be, but I guess I can't answer that right now. I'm not sure.
Sure. This next question is about maintenance. Would any of these gardens survive without intervention or stewardship?
No. Well, and what I mean by that is all gardens need to be weeded, no matter how well designed they are. We did with every design, try to think through the weeds and the maintenance. And so we handled that in one of 2 ways. And this was in some ways decided by the garden partner and what they wanted. Some wanted to have that very mulched look. So they wanted a plant in a large space and another plant in a large space with a lot of mulch. That was just that was going to work for them. And so that's what we did. And in other cases, we planted such that, what our objective, either whether we use mulch or whether we didn't use mulch and we just used a lot of plants instead of using a lot of mulch, was that we wanted to cover the soil with either mulch or plants. We didn't want any exposed soil if we could manage that, so that to sort of limit the amount of, the opportunity for weeds to get in there. So that was our strategy, but we were very clear with every garden partner that no matter how well we thought about it, they would have to weed. So that we made that, we part of, as I said, we had everybody sign a letter of agreement that they would maintain the space for 5 years, and the weeding and maintenance was one of the things we specified in that agreement. So people knew that up front.
All right. Can you explain how you chose the garden locations?
Well, we wanted our objectives were, as I think I explained, that the Lehigh Valley is sort of divided into 3 sections. We have an urban core, then we have sort of a suburban area, and then we have a rural area. And we wanted to make sure that we had gardens in each of those areas and as well distributed as we could. But we also wanted to have them in a variety of locations, and different examples. So we chose the location in part by, was it showcasing something different? Was it showcasing, was it in an area we hadn't been in, or in a town we hadn't been in yet? So we, the way we picked the partners was mostly just to try to get a full array of examples for people. And we didn't have a lot of trouble finding partners. We had a lot of people who wanted to work with us, so that was never a problem. But after those first couple years, when we had some examples out there, we got a little bit more picky about who we would partner with, just to be able to do something different or in a new place.
All right. And who provided the labor for the garden installations?
We asked the garden partner to get the volunteers. So I was the only person working on the program for Lehigh Gap Nature Center. I am only a part-time employee, so I only worked for 20 hours a week. We had the garden partner. I would come to each planting to oversee and make sure that it was, that the plants were located in the proper place. And I would often do an example of, this is how you plant, a small shrub. This is how you plant a perennial. But I intentionally did not dig many holes. And that was all the idea of kind of getting the garden partner in there and caring for that space right away. And I think that was a good thing that we did.
All right. Did you use a lot of sedges in your designs, or did you have some other tip for helping the gardens have longer seasonal interest?
We didn't use many sedges. I did often try to use, shrubs with smaller shrubs that would be good for a smaller space, that would have berries or some kind of interesting something or other. We used a lot of the small variety of winterberry and that sort of thing if we could. So that's kind of how we tried to prolong the season a bit.
All right. In the booklet that's available for download, do you have a photo of the informational sign that you used at the garden sites?
There's not one. Each sign was designed for that garden specifically. So each garden had its own personalized sign, and it featured plants within the garden and then information specific to that garden. So since they often the garden would serve a different purpose depending on the partner. Sometimes it was for pollinators. Sometimes it was a stormwater garden. So there were these different aspects to each sign, and they were tailored for that particular garden and those particular plants.
All right. What, if any, soil testing and soil amendment work did you do on the site?
We did none of either of that. And I found that it didn't matter. Our gardens were fine. I asked our garden partners specifically not to amend the soil. We had one case in which they did, and the result was not good. So not that I would say that soil testing is it's an important thing. I don't want to say that it's not, but in our case, we did not do that, and it did seem to, all of our gardens did really well. We live in the Lehigh Valley, which is a kind of a rich limestone area for the most part, so that might have had something to do with it.
All right. We've had a couple of follow-up comments on butterfly bush, indicating that it's problematic in some areas like Pennsylvania and Virginia. Another comment about a site in Annapolis where there are dozens of monarchs on it. And this kind of leads into another question, which was whether or not you did research on the pollinator value of cultivars in particular.
We did not do that research.
All right.
But we did not use cultivars for the most part. We were pretty stuck with, we were working with a native grower. So. All
right. For the person who asked the question about cultivars, if you research Annie White online, she has done a considerable amount of research on cultivars, and you'll be able to read her research findings on her website. Again, that's Annie White. I believe she's in Vermont. And Great. We have time just for another couple of questions. Did you give your garden partners instructions or recommendations for irrigation frequency or volumes?
We asked our garden partners to water only the first couple weeks if unless it was raining well. And and only if in extreme dry conditions. And that seemed to work out.
Thank you, Kate, so much for all this really interesting information. It certainly is a project that we will explore more on your website, and I'm sure many of us will download the resources that you have available. So thank you again for taking time to share it with us.
Thank you so much, Penny. My pleasure.